I was trying to find someone who would give us the feeling and kind of hold on to both sides of our focus, the African diaspora and the Gullah Geechee. And I came across the film, Familiar Faces in Unfamiliar Places, and it is a wonderful film. I look forward to you all meeting Sheila Walker, and I guarantee you will be amazed.
Okay, I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm really ecstatic to have been invited by Eric Crawford to talk about Gullah Geechee culture in the context of the global African diaspora. I'm from Jersey, and I had a suspicion that there was more going on in the world than what was going on in New Jersey, so I escaped. And I went to Africa when I was 19. I went with the student exchange program. I lived with a family in the Bamoun Kingdom in Cameroon, and I've essentially been living out the results of that 2-month experience ever since. My identity as a result now of having been to most places in the African diaspora in the world, as well as to most African countries, is that my identity is that I'm from the global African diaspora with a U.S. passport as an accident of a slave ship. When I'm in Brazil, nobody says, oh, you must be from the United States. They say, oh, you talk Portuguese funny. What part of Brazil are you from? I was in India, and a guy from Kerala said, are you from Kerala? And I thought, oh, okay. So, I'm not going to talk about Gullah Geechee culture. Who am I to talk about Gullah Geechee culture? I'm going to talk about what Gullah Geechee culture taught me about elsewhere in the African diaspora. And so I was thinking, okay, what's a good metaphor for this? Well, I thought of Anansi, the spider. And I thought, well, let me just see Gullah Geechee culture as the body of the spider, and then the legs would be how you could begin here and see other echoes of the same kind of cultural phenomena elsewhere in the African diaspora. For example, in my first experience, and I'm going to show you some images so that you'll have a sense that I have some legitimacy. But the first time I came to Gullah Geechee land, I went to Daufuskie Island, and Mr. Thomas started to tell an animal story about big massing critters. And I thought, oh, wow, those stories still exist. You know, I knew about Brer Rabbit, but I never heard anybody tell a Brer Rabbit story. I just read about Brer Rabbit. Then I was in Ecuador, on the Pacific coast of South America. And Juan Garcia, who was a wonderful researcher and storyteller, he was telling a Tío Conejo story, Brer Rabbit, Uncle Rabbit in Spanish. And he said that he had a visitor from Burkina Faso in West Africa. Juan started to tell him, to the man from Burkina Faso, his Tío Conejo story. And he paused to drink some water, and the man from Burkina Faso continued the same story. Every time I say that, I wish I'd been there. You know, I feel like I've been there. It gives me goose pimples. Because when was the last time an African found himself involuntarily on the Pacific coast of South America? The story was the same. I thought that was just amazing. And so one could also tell Anansi stories. So the wisdom tales have continued to exist. Foodways. I was on St. Helena and I ate some red rice. I said, oh, I know this flavor, but I've never been to St. Helena before. But I didn't jollof rice in various places in West Africa. It was the same flavor. So I thought I would look at Gullah Geechee culture or Geechee Gullah culture, as a jumping off place to talk about some elements of this global African diaspora. So there's my title, From Daufuskie Island to the Global African Diaspora. I knew that the most African culture in the United States existed in these islands, but I didn't know anything. I did know, however, I knew Herman Blake. And Herman Blake said, well, you gotta go to Daufuskie Island. So I went to Daufuskie Island. And what Herman said was, call Mr. Jake and he'll come get you. So I called Mr. Jake. And he came and got me. And so he's crabbing as he's taking me to Daufuskie Island on his boat. And he took me to Miss Bertha's house, and that's where I stayed. And I was very struck when I saw her. She was eating in a bowl with a tablespoon, and she was eating grits and some fish and some sauce. And I thought, I've seen this scene before. I had seen women with their heads tied up, eating out of a bowl with a tablespoon, and eating fufu or toe or futu or sadza or one of those African staples with a tablespoon out of a bowl. So the image was familiar to me. Now, a colleague was supposed to go with me, but he said, somebody said that there would be snakes, and he said, oh no, I'm not going. And I thought, oh no, no snakes. And so this is Mr. Thomas. And he and Miss Bertha took me for a ride, and I saw a snake. That snake, I just made this thing move too fast, sorry. But I saw a snake, and I said, oh, there's a snake. And they didn't react. And I thought, oh, maybe that's like seeing a squirrel. You know, I see a lot of snakes in the road. No. Then I realized something else. You know, they talked funny, those people on Daufuskie Island. Well, that's when I realized that I talked funny too. It took them a while to realize what I was saying about that snake. They're like, snake? Mr. Thomas, who had one eye and a bad leg, jumped out of the car, went around to the trunk, got his gun, and killed a snake. So that was my welcome. Welcome to the Sea Islands. So that's the snake. And they thanked me. I said, why? Well, because that's one fewer snake. They don't like the snakes. And they're dangerous. Then,
how did they react to you?
I went to Sapelo.
I went for 2 days. Most of the ones who was in our party who was exposed to Toronto, I was one of them. That was so amazing, you know. One guy walked up to me and he said, I didn't have my tie on that day, and he said, are you one of us or are you one of the Americans? I said, I'm one of the Americans. But then I said, well, I could be one of you all.
So Cornelia Bailey from Sapelo Island is talking about her trip to Sierra Leone and how it was so familiar. She said the food was familiar. There was smoked fish, and she said, get her smoked fish, because she hadn't seen that in a while. This is part of a documentary that I did called Scattered Africa, Faces and Voices of the African Diaspora. So this is my jumping off point to talk about, she went to Africa and felt part of things. Well, I did too, and that's what I was mentioning when I was 19. I went to Cameroon, and I was welcomed home. And this is before African Americans were going to Africa to look for ancestors. I was looking for adventures, not ancestors. This was prior to roots. And a man came to lunch and said, well, you're a black American, yes? Well, that means your ancestors came from Africa. I said, well, I hadn't thought about ancestors at that point. And I hadn't thought about that. And I said, well, I don't know, I guess so. And he said, well, welcome home, welcome to the source. And that was the beginning of my going to Africa and thinking that I belong there too. And that that's part of my story, and that you can't tell the story of the Americas, certainly, without understanding the role of Africa in the Americas. So, first thing I think it's fundamental to know about the Americas is who was here. We know that there had been Native Americans, most of whom were eliminated. So, let me give you some statistics. We are given the impression that the Americas was a European creation, but if you know the demographics of the creation of the Americas, it doesn't really make sense to see it as just a European creation. Of the 6.5 million people who crossed the Atlantic during the first 300 years of the existence of the modern Americas, 5.5 million people were African, 1 million came from Europe. That's pretty basic. Did everybody know that?
No, ma'am.
When I learned that, I was mad. You know, I had a PhD when I learned that. So,
Put that back up again.
I will send it to you. So, at the end of the 19th century, 12 to 15 million people had come from Africa to the Americas, all of the Americas, Chile to Canada. We are given the impression that African diasporans are not every place. African diasporans are every place in the Americas. Each of the countries of the Americas has at least one organized group of African descendants. And now, apparently a third of the population of the Americas is composed of African descendants. There are more than 200 million African descendants in the Americas, and we in the United States, we know we're the center of the world, and that the African diaspora speaks English, of course. Well, that's not true. There are more than 100 million Afro-Brazilians, so Portuguese is the first language of the African diaspora. Well, it's the first language of the African diaspora in the world. And the first, Brazil is second in African-descended populations after Nigeria. So there are more African descendants in Brazil than any other country in Africa other than Nigeria. Now, I love this guy, Nicolas Guillen, Afro-Cuban poet, but I only love a little bit of him. He's got a poem, and I never remember its name, and I don't know the rest of it, but sin conocernos nos reconoceremos. Without knowing each other, we will recognize each other. And what I find is, if you look at these indices from Gullah Geechee culture, then they help you recognize phenomena that you find elsewhere. Yesterday, with Sam Livingston, we were talking about having a language. Well, other African descendants in the Americas also have languages. There's Ayefuna in Central America, and Honduras, Belize, Nicaragua, and Guatemala. They have a language. What is really frustrating to me is that people who study the language look for the Africanity of their language, yet the word for human being is Mutu. Bantu, Muntu, human being. There's Palenquero in Colombia. There are the French Creoles, there are the English Creoles, there are the various languages they exam for, from the Maroons in Suriname, Samaka, Juka. So, another jumping off point for understanding the global African diaspora. So, I think that we will recognize each other once we get models in our heads. For example, the ring shout. I attended an event on St. Helena Island in 1999, and that's the first place I saw the ring shout. Then, when I went other places in the Americas and beyond, I began to notice African descendants dancing in a ring. Often counterclockwise, but not always. That's important. So we find similar characteristics. Not that everybody got together and said, how are you going to do it? But interestingly, people are doing the same things. I was looking at my videos. I have a lot of video footage from various places. And I thought, oh, the stereotype is true. We are always singing and dancing. And what's wrong with singing and dancing? But then I read an article written by a Congo, a Mukongo, part of the Bakongo ethnic group that created the Congo Kingdom, that involuntarily created so many people to create the African basis of all of the Americas. And he wrote an article, this linguist wrote an article about Congos dancing in Congo Square in Louisiana. And he talked about the fact that in French, fait la bamboula, bamboula being a colonial African-descended dance, bamboula meant to dance, to party, but also from the French meant create disorder. And bamboula now is a derogatory term in French for Africans and African descendants. In Kikongo, however, bamboula refers to ancestors. And he said what the Congos were saying was, we are dancing so as not to forget our ancestors. We are dancing to remember. And so then if you notice that African descendants are dancing all over the place without having gotten together and said, how are you going to remember your ancestors? Dancing to remember. They've chosen in Paraguay, in Chile, these are the McIntosh County Chapters, 1999 at Penn Center. They have chosen to dance in circles here in the Southeast United States. I will also show you Brazil, northern Brazil, Maranhão. There's a circle. I'll show you next. I'm going to end with Uruguay, a reenactment of 19th century Congo dancing. And there's one that I'm leaving out, you'll see it. Brazil. And this phenomenon is normal and indigenous and just to do the root labor of the Americas. They were brought as bodies, not that they were brought as minds, which makes no sense. Europeans wanted to create new societies, but they wanted to create new societies mainly in tropical, subtropical areas about which they knew nothing. They did not have the technology to develop the Americas, but they knew who did have the technology to develop the Americas, and they knew that those people were Africans, and they knew that in specific areas of Africa, Africans had dominated, had known those technologies for millennia. So, transfers of technology. Here we are. That's what we did. So, Africans were imported specifically for their knowledge. Rice Negroes, cotton Negroes. In South America, Brazil, Uruguay, Ecuador, places where there's gold, there were Africans who were referred to as negros minas, mining Negroes, who were brought from where? The Costa das Minas, as the Portuguese say, the Gold Coast, now Ghana. But first, rice. The myth is that rice was domesticated in Asia and that the Portuguese brought it and shared the rice culture with the British for some reason. Well, that's just not true. The rice that came to this area is a different rice from the Asian rice. It's Oriza glaberrima instead of Oriza sativa. So this is the rice that came to this area had been domesticated in Mali 3,000 years earlier. I never knew that. The Mwene-Congo, the king of the Congo, of the Bakongo kingdom, was referred to as the blacksmith king. Africans in that area had been using iron for, about 3,000 years. Philip Simmons, you all know him, right? From Charleston.
You look around the wall here, this is something I work in that 72 years. I went to the blacksmith shop, shoe hall. I didn't dream I would be making gifts.
So, gold mining in the Americas is African. Once the Native Americans were decimated and the Europeans found the gold of the indigenous people, they imported Africans. In Ouro Preto, the second rich town in the Americas, in Brazil, there was a gold rush to Ouro Preto, just like there was in the United States. And there was a wonderful saying on the part of the Portuguese that having mining Negroes, negros minas, in the gold mines brought almost magical luck for finding gold. Luck. They recruited these people specifically because of their technological knowledge. So, this is kings from Ghana, Ivory Coast, and this is one of the major areas in which gold was and continues to be mined and worked in Africa. And so the Portuguese imported negros minas to Ouro Preto to work gold. And this is Ecuador. And people are still panning gold in rivers in Ecuador. So this is called Gold Beach, this village. And I saw these earrings and I thought, oh, they must be from West Africa. No, they're from Ecuador. Made with gold from that river you just saw, the Santiago River. This is Ouro Preto in Brazil. And a group of Afro-Brazilians bought what was a working gold mine and are now using it as an educational center. So this is the entrance to the gold mine, and they do tours, and they're amazingly instructive. And there were many mines in this
Toda a
area.
tecnologia empregada aqui na extração do ouro, ela é devido a esse conhecimento africano. Eles precisaram dessa mão de obra especializada. Então eles vão numa região específica da África, que é a região que a gente chama de Costa da Mina, né? Que já tinha grandes reinos no passado que faziam uso desse ouro, né? E a gente fala do reino Achante, né? Do grande reino do Mali também.
Não fosse a presença africana, não fosse o saber e o conhecimento trazido pelos africanos, que embora não tenham chegado aqui como mão de obra escravizada, Portugal jamais teria conseguido tirar daqui o volume de ouro que tirou.
So thinking of the fact that Africans brought rice technology to this area made me think about other technologies that Africans took to other areas of the Americas, such as iron, such as gold mining. But the African diaspora is not limited to the Americas as we are often led to think. This is not a patchwork quilt from this area. This patchwork quilt is from Karnataka in southwestern India. From there, and these are African people in Southeast Africa who are now in Karnataka, the state of Karnataka in India. And nobody believes me when I say they are Afro-Indian, so I have to show you there are Afro-Indians. And the women in Karnataka make these beautiful patchwork quilts. They also perform other gestures that we may recognize. And they have sex. They partied when Obama arrived. Afro-Indians and their version of reach out. So, thank you very much. This was all inspired by what I learned here in Gullah Geechee country. Thank you very much.